He almost didn't make it to this argument. 18 months ago, Jeremy Clarkson was on holiday in the Indian Ocean. He couldn't swim. He could barely walk up a flight of stairs without holding someone's arm. Doctors told him afterwards that he had been days, possibly days, from dying. 2 stents were fitted into his heart in emergency surgery. He went home. He recovered. He went back to the farm. Then, last year, on camera, in front of the crew he had worked with for 5 series, he told Caleb Cooper he had cancer. Aggressive prostate cancer. Caught early. Surgery followed. And in June 2026, Jeremy Clarkson, to 66 years old, 2 stents in his chest, mud on his boots, was officially declared in remission. He called himself the world's luckiest man. And then Chris Packham went on Gogglebox and called his opening credits a lie. This was never a row about farming. It was never really about Chris Packham or animated title sequences, or the accuracy of countryside imagery on Prime Video. It was a 66-year-old man, standing at the strangest crossroads of his life, trying to figure out whether the person he had always been was still the person he wanted to be. And someone handed him a rock. And for the first time in 30 years he picked it up, threw it, and then immediately started wondering if he should have. That tension, that specific, very human tension, is what this story is actually about. And almost nobody covering it noticed. To understand what happened, you have to understand who Jeremy Clarkson was before the farm. Not the television character. Not the controversies. The man underneath them? Jeremy Clarkson grew up in Doncaster, the son of a man who sold Paddington Bear toys for a living. Not a wealthy family? Not a connected family. A boy from South Yorkshire who found early on that saying the thing nobody else would say was the fastest route to being noticed. He has described it himself. He always quite enjoyed being in trouble. From his school days onward, the rock in the pond, the ripple, the reaction. That was the engine. For 30 years it powered everything. Top Gear, the columns, the sackings, the public fights, the controversies that kept his name at the top of every entertainment news cycle when most television presenters of his generation had quietly faded. The rock always worked. Then his heart nearly stopped. Then the camera caught him telling a young man from the Cotswolds that he had cancer, on a Tuesday morning in a field, the way you might mention that the tractor needed a service. And something shifted. He has been open about this. Unusually open, for a man whose entire public identity was built on not being open about anything that mattered. The reaction to his cancer disclosure, he said, landed harder than he expected. People cared. People wrote. People went and got themselves tested. Health organizations reported a measurable increase in men seeking prostate cancer screenings after his diagnosis aired on television. A man who spent 30 years being the most divisive figure in British broadcasting accidentally became a public health advocate. Being liked, he discovered, felt different to being notorious. Better, even. So, at 66, fresh from remission, with 2 stents holding his heart together and a farm that has somehow become a 45 million-pound enterprise built on mud and failure, he started wondering whether to become an adult. A kind person? A tolerant person? And then Celebrity Gogglebox aired. Chris Packham, the Springwatch host and conservationist, watched the opening titles of Clarkson's farm with his stepdaughter Megan McCubbin and reacted the way Chris Packham reacts to most things that don't align with his worldview, immediately, loudly, on camera. He said the animation, a hand-drawn sequence of a sun-drenched, cheerful, Winnie-the-Poohish Cotswolds farm, was not what a real farm looked like. That most farms were monocultures sprayed with deadly chemicals. That animals were kept in crates, in the dark, being crushed. That Clarkson's farm was putting the wrong idea in people's minds. All of this, he said, before the opening titles had even finished. Clarkson, the man who had spent weeks wondering whether to become a nicer person, read this, and picked up the rock. The Sun column landed hard. He called Packham endlessly angry. He said the critique played well in rooms full of nose rings and Palestine flags at vegan activist meetings in Hackney, but that on television it didn't play well at all. He also noted, and this detail is quietly devastating, that Chris Packham had visited Diddley Squat in 2012 for a day of foraging and birdwatching, and that if animals had been in crates, being crushed and kept in the dark, he was fairly confident the naturalist would have noticed at the time. The farming community erupted in Clarkson's defense. The Countryside Alliance praised the show. Agricultural commentators challenged Packham's statistics. One by one, the organizations that work daily with British farmers lined up to push back. Packham did not go quiet. He went to Instagram. He posted statistics about greenhouse gases, glyphosate use, livestock welfare conditions. He addressed it directly to Clarkson, asking if it was really all happy and smiley down on the farm. The row that had started with an animated title sequence was now a full-scale, public argument about the soul of British agriculture. Here's what everyone missed. Packham was trying to expose a gap between Clarkson's television farm and the reality of industrial British farming. He was making a legitimate point, delivered in the least effective way possible, to the largest available audience, at a moment specifically designed to make him look like the angry one. The council thought they had leverage. They were writing the marketing copy. Packham thought he was correcting a misleading narrative. He was creating the most sympathetic version of Jeremy Clarkson that British television had produced in a decade. A 66-year-old man, 2 months out of cancer remission, wondering, publicly and honestly, whether it was time to become a better person. And here was someone attacking him for an animated drawing. You cannot manufacture that. Now here is the part that even people following this row closely have not joined up. The second column, the one Clarkson wrote for the Times on Sunday, the one that came after the rock had already been thrown, is the most revealing thing he has written in years. He did not double down. He could have. The response from the farming community had been overwhelming. The public sympathy was entirely with him. Every newspaper in Britain had covered the row in his favor. He had, by any conventional measure, won. Instead, he wrote something that felt genuinely unguarded. He said he had been wondering for weeks whether to become an adult, a kind person, a tolerant person. He said that since the reaction to his cancer disclosure, he had come to enjoy being seen as a nice person rather than a troublemaker, in a way he hadn't experienced before in 30 years of being a troublemaker. And then he said that he probably shouldn't have written that Sun column. Think about that. A man who built his entire career on never apologizing, never retreating, never putting the rock back down, sitting in the Cotswolds, at 66, looking at what he'd just thrown, and admitting that the new version of himself, the one who had just survived cancer and an emergency heart procedure, and found out that people actually cared about him, probably should have kept quiet. Not because Packham was right, but because throwing rocks is who he was, and he is not entirely sure anymore who he wants to be. That is not a celebrity feud. That is a man changing. Consider what Clarkson has become in the past 18 months. He went into Clarkson's Farm Series 5 as the character the audience knew. The one who knew nothing about farming, who made expensive mistakes, who clashed with bureaucracy and lost, who stood in the rain in the wrong boots and somehow made it funny. Then his heart failed. Then he sat in a field and told Caleb Cooper he had cancer. Then 12,000 people a year die from prostate cancer in Britain, and Clarkson went on camera and said, "Go and get tested. It is not uncomfortable. It is not undignified, and it saved his life." Then he went into remission. Then he called himself the world's luckiest man. The character that made the show work, the bumbling, combustible, argumentative man who was always fighting something, is the same man who is now quietly wondering whether he is done fighting. That is the most interesting thing happening in British television right now. Not the row, the transformation underneath it. Chris Packham is not the villain of this story. He is a man who holds genuinely important views about the real state of British agriculture. The statistics he posted on Instagram about greenhouse gases, chemical use, livestock welfare, are not invented. The gap between diddly squat's sun-drenched aesthetic and the reality of intensive industrial farming is real, and it is worth discussing. But he chose to have that discussion in the worst possible way. On Gogglebox, within seconds of the opening titles, in a tone that made even people who agreed with his conclusions wince at his delivery. Then on Instagram, pointing a finger directly at Clarkson, days after the farming community had already rallied around him. The failure is the product. Every time Packham escalated, the public sympathy for Clarkson deepened. Not because Clarkson was right and Packham was wrong, but because one of them looked like a man who had just been through something that changed him, and the other one looked like he had never once considered that he might. Stand back. Look at the full picture. A man who nearly died from a blocked heart in 2024, who was diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer in 2025, who went into remission in June 2026, who sat in a column in the Times and admitted, for what might be the first time in 30 years of public life, that he probably should have kept quiet. That man picked a fight with a wildlife presenter over a cartoon, won the fight comprehensively, and then wrote a second column questioning whether he should have fought it at all. That is the most human thing Jeremy Clarkson has ever done in public. And Chris Packham, by being exactly who he always is at exactly the wrong moment, accidentally made it possible. The council thought they were the regulatory authority. They were the unpaid co-writers. Packham thought he was correcting a misleading narrative. He was handing Clarkson his most sympathetic public moment in a generation, The rock landed, the ripple spread, and for the first time in 30 years, the man who threw it is standing at the edge of the pond, wondering whether he wants to keep throwing them. He probably will, but something is different now, and anyone watching closely enough can see it. If you have made it this far, do subscribe and tap the notification bell, and the video on your screen right now is 1. We think you will find equally worth your time. We would genuinely love to know, did the cancer news change how you see Clarkson? And do you think the new, quieter version of him, if it lasts, makes better television or worse? Drop it in the comments. We read everyone. Thank you, as always, for watching.